If you were living in Madrid in the year 1600 or London in 1900, you would have believed your country would rule the world forever. You had the strongest military, the richest banks, and the most influence. But history has a very cold, very predictable way of repeating itself. For the last 5 centuries, every single global superpower has followed a specific, mathematical path toward collapse. It's like a clock that starts ticking the moment a nation reaches the top. We saw it happen to Spain, we saw it happen to Great Britain, and we saw the Soviet Union vanish in what felt like the blink of an eye. Now, as we look at the data in 2026, the warning lights are flashing red for the United States. The sequence is almost complete. Today, we aren't just looking at history, we are looking at a mirror. Stick with me, because understanding this pattern is the only way to protect your future when the ground beneath the world's economy starts to shift. To understand where the United States is standing in 2026, we first have to look back at the gold-filled streets of 16th century Spain. At the time, Spain was the wealthiest nation on earth. They had conquered the New World and were bringing back massive fleets filled with silver and gold. On paper, they were invincible. But Spain fell into a trap that many wealthy nations fall into. They stopped producing things and started just buying them. Because they had so much gold, they felt they didn't need to have factories or a strong middle class. They spent their wealth on endless overseas wars and a lifestyle they couldn't actually sustain. Soon, the easy money caused prices to skyrocket at home, a phenomenon we now call inflation. To keep up with their spending, the Spanish government began to borrow heavily from foreign bankers. Eventually, the debt became so large that the silver from the mines couldn't cover the interest. Spain went from being the master of the world to a bankrupt nation that spent centuries trying to recover. They followed the first part of the sequence. Wealth leads to overspending, which leads to debt, which leads to a total loss of power. Fast forward to the British Empire. By the end of the 1800s, the sun literally never set on British soil. The British pound was the world's reserve currency. Meaning, if you wanted to do business anywhere on the planet, you needed pounds. But the cost of maintaining a global empire is staggering. Britain found itself fighting massive wars and building an enormous government bureaucracy. By the time 1945 rolled around, Britain had won the Second World War, but they had lost their financial soul. They were buried under a mountain of debt owed mostly to the United States. For a few years, they tried to pretend nothing had changed, but by 1954, the reality set in. They could no longer afford to be a superpower. In a very short window of time, Britain had to give up its colonies, and the pound lost its status as the king of currencies. The transition was painful, and the standard of living for the average British citizen plummeted as the country realized it was no longer the one calling the shots. Then we see the most modern and rapid example, the Soviet Union. The USSR didn't have centuries to decline. They did it in record time. Their collapse was unique because it happened in roughly 900 days. They spent decades funneling every bit of their economic energy into a massive military to keep up with the United States, while their domestic economy was a hollow shell. They were printing money to keep their industries alive, but there were no goods on the shelves for people to buy. The government was lying about its economic data, claiming everything was fine while the foundation was rotting. When oil prices dropped, which was their primary way of getting hard cash, the entire system simply snapped. The Soviet Union didn't end because of a nuclear war. It ended because the government ran out of money and the people lost all faith in the system. 3 different empires, across 3 different centuries, all fell because they spent more than they earned and borrowed more than they could ever pay back. It is here that we have to look at the current situation of the world. Many people are beginning to realize that we are watching the principles for dealing with the changing world order play out in real time. This concept explains that there is a big cycle that all empires follow. It starts with a new, productive era, moves into a period of peace and prosperity, leads to a massive expansion of debt and wealth gaps, and ends with a period of internal conflict and financial breakdown. When we look at the United States in 2026, We are checking almost every box in the final stage of that cycle. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $34 trillion. To put that in perspective, the interest payments alone on that debt are now higher than the budget for the U.S. Navy and Air Force combined. The country is in a position where it has to borrow money just to pay the interest on the money they already borrowed. In the 1920s, the U.S. became the world's creditor, meaning everyone owed them money. Today, they are the world's biggest debtor. This shift is the exact same one that signaled the end for the British. When a country's debt-to-GDP ratio crosses a certain line, usually around 100%, history shows that it becomes almost impossible to grow your way out of it. There are only three ways out. You can default on the debt, which destroys your reputation. You can raise taxes to extreme levels, which kills the economy, or you can print money to pay the debt. The U.S. has chosen the third option. By printing trillions of dollars, the government is essentially devaluing the currency. This is why your groceries, your rent, and your car insurance feel so much more expensive today than they did just a few years ago. It's not just corporate greed, it is the natural result of a currency that is being flooded into the system to keep a debt-heavy empire afloat. But the financial side is only half of the story. The sequence of collapse also includes a social element. In the final days of the Spanish and British empires, the gap between the ultra-wealthy and the struggling working class became a canyon. When the money starts to lose its value, the people at the top, who own assets like land and stocks, get richer, while the people who work for a paycheck get poorer. This creates massive internal tension. People start looking for someone to blame. They become deeply divided by politics, geography, and class. We see this today in the staggering levels of polarization in 2026. A nation that is broke and divided is a nation that is vulnerable. History shows that when a superpower is distracted by its own internal fighting, it loses its ability to lead on the world stage. As we look toward the rest of 2026 and beyond, we have to ask, what happens next? In the past, when a reserve currency failed, a new one took its place. When the Spanish real failed, the Dutch guilder took over. When the guilder failed, the British pound took over. When the pound failed, the US dollar took over. Now, for the first time in history, there isn't one clear successor. Instead, we see a multipolar world where different nations are trying to move away from the dollar. This is a process called de-dollarization. Countries like China, India, and Brazil are starting to trade in their own currencies. If the world stops needing dollars to buy oil or gold, the US loses its exorbitant privilege. We would no longer be able to print money without consequences. We would have to live like every other country within our means. This sounds like a dark prediction, but it is actually an opportunity for those who are paying attention. The people who survived the collapses of the past were those who understood that money and wealth are two different things. Currency is just paper or digital blips on a screen. Real wealth is found in things that have intrinsic value. In 2026, financial literacy is your greatest armor. You need to understand how to diversify your assets and how to protect yourself from the declining purchasing power of the dollar. The pattern of history is not meant to scare us, but to prepare us. We are living through a massive shift in the global order, a shift that only happens once every 100 years or so. By watching the mistakes of Spain, Britain, and the USSR, we can navigate the coming years with clarity instead of panic. The era of easy money and undisputed dominance is certainly changing. We are entering a period where productivity, real value, and local resilience will matter more than financial engineering. The sequence of collapse is a teacher, and its lesson is simple. No amount of military might can save a nation from the consequences of bad math. The world of 2026 is moving fast, and the old rules no longer apply. It is time to look at the world as it truly is, not as we want it to be. If you want to stay ahead of these global shifts and learn more about how to protect your family's future in these uncertain times, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are committed to bringing you these complex historical and financial stories in a way that makes sense for everyone. Our goal is to empower you with the knowledge that the mainstream news often ignores. Your support helps us keep this channel going and allows us to reach more people who need to hear this message. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in our next exploration of the world's most important stories, right here on Kiddie Finance.